In 1954, a teacher in Ohio kept a wooden paddle hanging on the wall, and not one parent ever complained. It had a name burned into the handle and holes drilled through it to cut wind resistance. Today, that teacher would be walked out in handcuffs. But here is the twist. Most of these rules were so ordinary that your own grandparents lived by them without blinking. Number 14 got children punished for something they were born with. And number 3 was enforced with a ruler and a stopwatch, and the science behind it turned out to be completely wrong. These 30 rules shaped the generation that won wars and reached the moon. They also did things that would have a modern parent calling a lawyer before lunch. Hit subscribe because this will change how you see that old class photo. Let us count down. Number 30, the milk you drank whether you wanted it or not. Every morning a crate arrived at the classroom door, little glass bottles or wax cartons sweating with condensation, and each child was handed one. There was no asking, there was no allergy form, no lactose question, no permission slip. You drank your milk, and you drank it before recess, while the teacher watched the room to make sure every bottle was empty. The federal school milk program, expanded across the decade, pushed cartons into nearly every public classroom in the country, and a half pint cost the school just a few cents. A child who pushed the bottle away got a stern word and sometimes a note home. The idea that a kid might simply not want it or could not stomach it never entered the conversation. Number 29, standing at attention when an adult walked in. The classroom door would open, the principal or a visiting parent would step inside, and 30 children would scrape their chairs back and rise to their feet in silence. Nobody sat until told. It was drilled into students from the first grade, the same way you learn to line up by height. Teachers expected a crisp, instant response, and a slow riser earned a frown that everyone in the room understood. The ritual was meant to teach respect for authority, and respect in 1955 meant standing bolt upright with your hands at your sides. A child today would be told to stay seated and stay comfortable. Back then, comfort was not the point. Obedience was, and it was performed out loud every single day. Number 28, fountain pens and inkwells, ballpoints forbidden. Look closely at a desk from the early 50s, and you will find a round hole in the corner. That was the inkwell, and it was not decoration. Children learned to write with a steel nib dipped in ink, and the new ballpoint pens that were sweeping through offices were banned outright in many classrooms. Teachers insisted that ballpoints made handwriting lazy and sloppy, that a real student mastered the dip pen first. Ink-stained fingers were a badge of the grade school day. A spilled inkwell could ruin a lesson and earn a scolding, and blotting paper was as essential as a pencil. Parents today would balk at the mess alone. Back then, the struggle was considered part of the discipline, a small daily test of patience and control. Number 27, posture drills with a book on your head. Sit up straight was not a suggestion in 1953. It was a graded expectation. Teachers walked the aisles checking spines, and slouchers were called out by name in front of everyone. In some schools, children practiced walking with a book balanced on the head, shoulders back, chin level, to build what the era called proper carriage. Girls especially were drilled on it, the belief being that posture revealed breeding and character. A child who hunched over a desk was seen as undisciplined, possibly weak. There were no ergonomic chairs, no conversation about back pain or growing bodies. There was only the straight line of the spine and a teacher who would tap it back into place. Modern parents would call it rigid. Then it was simply correct. Number 26, loyalty rituals every morning, no exceptions. The Pledge of Allegiance opened the day, hand over heart. And during the decade, the words under God were added by an act of Congress in 1954. But the pledge was only the start. Many classrooms followed it with patriotic songs, a salute to the flag, and recitations meant to inoculate children against the fears of the Cold War. There was no opting out, no quiet sitting it out at your desk. A child who would not participate was singled out, questioned, sometimes sent to the office. The era was gripped by suspicion of anything that looked un-American, and a school was expected to produce loyal citizens first and scholars second. A parent who tried to excuse their child today might succeed. In 1955, that request would have raised eyebrows nobody wanted raised. Number 25, the morning inspection of your body. First pattern break. Before the lesson began, children lined up for inspection. Teachers checked fingernails for dirt, ears for wax, necks for grime, and hair for lice or nuts, running a pencil through it without asking. Hands were turned over, palms up, to see if you had washed. A child who failed was marched to the sink, or worse, held up as an example of what not to be. Cleanliness was treated as a moral quality, and a dirty child reflected on a dirty home. There was no privacy in it, no sense that a 7-year-old might be embarrassed in front of classmates. The inspection was public by design because shame was considered a perfectly good motivator. A teacher who put hands on a child like that now would be facing a very different morning. Number 24, one bathroom trip, and you had better make it count. The hall pass was a wooden block or a laminated card, and there was usually only one. A child raised a hand, asked permission, and waited for a yes that did not always come. Many teachers enforced a single bathroom break per day, on a schedule, and a child who needed to go outside that window was told to wait, or humiliatingly told no. Accidents happened, and when they did, the shame was the punishment. The thinking was that bodily needs should bend to the classroom routine, not the other way around. Parents today fight schools over exactly this, armed with doctor's notes and policy meetings. In the 50s, the teacher's no was the final word, and the bladder was expected to fall in line. Number 23, the Palmer method, where every letter looked the same. Penmanship was its own subject, and it was unforgiving. Children practiced the Palmer method, endless rows of identical loops and ovals, the whole arm moving from the shoulder rather than the wrist. The goal was uniformity, a class of children whose handwriting was nearly indistinguishable. Teachers graded the slant of every letter, the spacing, the pressure of the line. A left-leaning slant could cost you. Hours each week went to drills that produced a single approved style, and individuality in handwriting was treated as a flaw to be corrected, not a personality to be encouraged. The belief was that neat writing meant a neat mind. Today we hardly teach cursive at all. Then, a sloppy capital letter could earn a child a reputation that followed them through the grades. Number 22, the ruler that measured your hemline and your hair. Dress codes in the 1950s came with actual measuring tools. Girls knelt on the floor and their skirts had to touch it, or they were sent home to change. Hemlines, collars, and the fit of a blouse were all subject to a teacher's ruler and a teacher's judgment. Boys were measured too, hair off the collar and out of the eyes, no exceptions, with some schools sending a boy to the barber on the spot. The rules were enforced like law, and a parent who objected was usually told the school knew best. There was no negotiation about self-expression or comfort. Appearance signaled respect for the institution, and the institution policed it down to the inch. A modern dress code fight is a debate. In 1956, it was a measurement. Number 21, silent lunch eaten under watch. In many schools, lunch was not a break. It was an extension of the discipline. Children ate in silence, hands visible, eyes on their own trays, monitored by a teacher who patrolled the rows. Talking earned a warning, then a consequence. The reasoning was that a quiet room was an orderly room, and order was the highest classroom virtue. The chatter and social tangle that we now see as the whole point of lunch was treated as chaos to be suppressed. A child who finished early sat with folded hands and waited. There were no choices on the tray and no leaving food behind because clean plates were expected and waste was a small sin. Parents today want their kids to socialize and decompress. Back then, even chewing had rules. Number 20, writing the same sentence 100 times. The punishment was as old as the chalkboard and twice as tedious. A child who misbehaved was made to write a single line over and over, 50 times, 100 times, sometimes more, filling a page with the same confession: "I will not talk in class. I will not talk in class." The hand cramped, the afternoon vanished, and the lesson supposedly sank in. Teachers handed it out for whispering, for passing notes, for looking out the window. The point was less the words than the dull weight of the repetition, the sense that your time belonged to the school and could be spent breaking you of a habit. Educators now call it pointless and even counterproductive. Then it was a standby, scribbled out at the end of 1,000 school days across the country. Number 19. The dunce cap and the corner. Few images sum up the era, like a child in a tall paper cone, face to the wall, while the class carried on behind him. The dunce cap was real, and so was the corner, and so was the stool placed there for the slow learner or the troublemaker. Public humiliation was an accepted teaching tool, the belief being that shame would scare a child into improving. A struggling student was not quietly helped. He was displayed. The whole room learned who the supposed dunce was, and the label could stick for years. There were no conversations about learning differences, no specialists, no dignity built into the discipline, just a cone of paper and a corner where a child was left to feel small. A parent who saw it today would not file a complaint. They would file a lawsuit. Number 18. Boys and girls kept on opposite sides. Many schools split children by sex the moment they arrived. Separate doors, separate lines, separate stairwells, separate playground areas, divided by a painted line nobody crossed. Boys entered one way, girls the other, and the two were not to mix in the hallways. Inside the classroom, they were often seated on opposite sides of the room, and a boy caught talking to a girl might be moved or scolded. The logic was a tangle of propriety and control, a belief that mixing led to trouble. There was no thought given to friendship across that line or to the strangeness of teaching children that the other half of the room was off limits. Today, the painted line would be gone before the first bell. Then it was simply how a proper school was arranged. Number 17. Home economics for girls, shop for boys, and no switching. Second pattern break, controversy incoming. The school decided your future at the classroom door. Girls were marched to home economics, taught to sew, cook, and set a table. Preparation for the household, everyone assumed they would run. Boys went to shop class, to woodworking and metal and engines, preparation for the trade or the office. A girl who wanted to take shop was usually told no. A boy who wanted to learn to cook was laughed out of the idea. The tracks were rigid, and they were not subtle about what they expected each child to become. An entire generation was sorted by sex into separate skill sets before they were old enough to choose a thing for themselves. The arguments parents have now about gender and opportunity would have been unthinkable. In 1955, the curriculum decided, and it decided early. Number 16, cursive only, printing forbidden. Once a child passed the early grades, printing was treated as babyish, and cursive became mandatory for nearly everything. Tests, essays, even arithmetic explanations had to flow in connected script. A child who reverted to printing because it was clearer or faster was corrected, and sometimes marked down regardless of whether the answer was right. The reasoning was that cursive was the mark of an educated adult, and printing belonged to the very young. Speed and legibility, the things that actually matter, came second to conformity with the approved style. Parents today watch schools quietly drop cursive entirely and barely notice. Back then, a child's failure to master the connected hand was treated as a failure of seriousness, a sign they had not yet grown into a proper student. Number 15, stand up and recite, ready or not. Learning in the 50s leaned hard on rote memorization, and the proof came in public. A teacher called your name, you stood beside your desk, and you recited from memory while the whole class listened. Times tables, capitals, the lines of a poem, the dates of presidents. A child who froze stood there in the silence until something came out, or the teacher moved on with a sigh that everyone heard. There was no soft landing, no working it out on paper, no quiet check-in. You knew it or you did not, and everybody found out which. The method built strong memories in some children and a lifelong dread of speaking up in others. We now know how much fear shuts down learning. Then, the standing recitation was the daily test, and the audience was the class. Number 14, left-handed children forced to switch. Here is the one that still makes people wince. A child born left-handed was not allowed to stay that way. Teachers tied the left hand behind the back, taped it to the desk, or wrapped it with a ruler every time it reached for the pencil. The left hand was called the wrong hand, sometimes the sinister hand, and using it was treated as a bad habit to be broken rather than a natural trait. Children were forced to write with the right hand until the left-handedness was, in the teacher's eyes, corrected. Many grew up with messy writing, stutters, and a quiet sense that part of them had been labeled wrong. We now understand handedness is wired in from birth. Then, schools tried to override it by force, punishing a child for how they were made. Number 13, duck and cover under the desk. Third pattern break. The Cold War walked right into the classroom. Children practiced atomic bomb drills, taught to dive under their wooden desks at the signal, knees tucked, hands over the back of the neck, faces down. A film cartoon told them a desk would help, and the alarm could sound at any moment, sending the whole school into a crouch on the floor. There was no counseling afterward, no acknowledgement of the fear it planted in small children who lay there imagining the flash. The drills ran alongside spelling and arithmetic as if they were just another part of the day. A generation grew up rehearsing for the end of the world during third period. Parents today demand mental health support after far less. Then, the kids dusted off their knees and went back to the lesson. Number 12, mandatory prayer and Bible reading. Across much of the country, the school day opened with prayer and a reading from Scripture, recited together regardless of what a child believed at home. Teachers led it, children followed, and a student from a different faith or no faith was expected to bow along. The practice was woven into the morning so tightly that questioning it was nearly unthinkable. There was no accommodation, no quiet alternative, no room for the family that worshiped differently or not at all. The Supreme Court would later rule school-sponsored prayer unconstitutional, but for the children of the 50s, it was simply how the day began. A parent today who found their child being led in a specific prayer would be on the phone within the hour. Back then, the amen came before the arithmetic, every morning, without question. Number 11, the note home asking parents to punish more. When a child misbehaved badly enough, the teacher sent a note home, and the note did not ask for a conversation. It asked the parents to follow through, meaning more discipline at home, often physical. School and home operated as a team, and a child who was paddled at school could fully expect a second round at the kitchen table that evening. The idea that a parent might side with the child or question the school was rare and frowned upon. Authority closed ranks. A child caught between teacher and parent had nowhere to appeal. Today, a note like that would spark a meeting, maybe a complaint, possibly a call to someone official. Then it was understood as cooperation, two adults making sure the lesson landed twice, with the child squarely in the middle. Number 10, the ruler across the knuckles. The wooden ruler was a teaching tool and a weapon both. A child who fidgeted, gave a wrong answer too many times, or simply annoyed the teacher might be told to hold out a hand palm down, knuckles up, and take a sharp crack across the fingers. The metal-edged rulers stung worst, and everyone knew which teachers favored them. It was instant, public, and accepted, no permission needed, no incident report filed. The pain was the point, A quick correction meant to keep the room in line. Children learned to read a teacher's mood and keep their hands hidden. There was no sense that striking a child's fingers might be a problem. It was as routine as chalk dust. A teacher who did that today would not finish the week. Then the ruler came down and the lesson continued. Number 9, your grades posted on the wall for everyone to see. Privacy around achievement did not exist. Test scores and class rankings were often posted publicly, names listed from top to bottom, so every child knew exactly where they stood, and so did everyone else. The strugglers were exposed week after week, the top students paraded, and the gap between them put on display. The thinking was that competition and shame would push the lower ranks to climb. Instead, it often crushed the children who were already struggling, branding them in front of friends they had to face every day. There was no consideration of how a 10-year-old might be wounded by a public ranking. Modern privacy laws make this illegal now, and for good reason. Back then, the list on the wall was motivation, and a child's worst subject was nobody's secret. Number 8, held back, and everyone knew why. Grade retention was common and casual. A child who fell behind was simply kept back to repeat the year, often more than once, ending up a head taller than classmates and marked as the one who failed. There was little intervention, no specialist support, no plan to figure out why a bright child might be struggling. You either kept up or you stayed put. The held-back student carried a visible stigma, sitting among younger children, the subject of whispers. Learning differences that we now recognize and support went unnamed, and the child wore the failure publicly. Parents today fight to get help and accommodations. In the 50s, the remedy was a second lap around the same grade, and the label that came with it, no questions asked about what was actually going wrong. Number 7, marriage rules that pulled teachers from the room. The rules did not only bind the children. In many districts, a female teacher who married or became pregnant was expected to resign, sometimes required to by contract. A beloved teacher could vanish mid-year because she had a baby on the way, and the children would arrive to find a stranger at the desk with no explanation. The belief was that a married or expecting woman belonged at home, not in front of a class, and the policy was enforced quietly and firmly. For students, it meant losing the adult they trusted for reasons no one bothered to explain to them. A school that fired a teacher for being pregnant today would face headlines and a courtroom. Then it was policy, and the disappearance of a favorite teacher was just something children were expected to absorb. Number 6, racial segregation, the law of the classroom. Through the first half of the decade, segregated schooling was the law across much of the country, and black and white children were kept in entirely separate schools. The black schools systematically underfunded, crowded, and shortchanged. The 1954 Supreme Court ruling in Brown v. Board of Education declared it unconstitutional, but change came slowly and bitterly, with many districts resisting for years. For the children of that era, the color line ran straight through their education, deciding which building they entered and what resources waited inside. It is the rule that shaped the most lives and left the deepest mark, and the fight to undo it defined a generation. To a modern parent, it is almost impossible to fathom that the state once sorted children this way by law, and that so many fought so hard to keep it. Number 5, speak only when spoken to, all day long. Fourth pattern break. The default state of the classroom was silence. A child did not speak unless called on, did not ask a question without raising a hand and waiting, did not turn to a neighbor, did not think out loud. Whispering was an offense. The talkative child was the problem child, and the room ran on the teacher's voice alone for hours at a stretch. Curiosity that bubbled over got tamped down, and the natural urge of a child to discuss, to argue, to wonder aloud was treated as disruption. We now build entire teaching methods around discussion and collaboration, around getting children to talk. Then the highest praise was that a class was quiet, and a teacher who could keep 30 children silent for a full day was considered a master of the craft. Number 4, ability tracking that decided your life at age 10. Children were sorted into groups by perceived ability, and the groups were not subtle. There were the bluebirds and the buzzards, the fast readers and the slow, and everyone knew which bird they were. The placements often hardened into permanent tracks that decided whether a child was steered toward college or toward a trade, sometimes based on a single test or a teacher's gut read of a young kid. A child labeled slow at 9 could carry that judgment for the rest of their schooling, with lower expectations following them year after year. There was little room to climb out. The decision felt scientific at the time and was anything but. Parents today fight these labels with everything they have. Then the sorting happened early, quietly, and stuck, shaping futures before children even understood it was happening. Number 3, the handwriting drills timed with a stopwatch and a ruler. This one was enforced with tools and backed by a belief that turned out to be flat wrong. Teachers timed children writing lines of script with a stopwatch, then measured the slant and spacing with a ruler, scoring them against a rigid standard. The conviction was that neat, fast, uniform handwriting revealed intelligence and good character, that a child who wrote sloppily had a sloppy mind and a weak future. Hours were poured into it, and children were judged and ranked on penmanship as if it forecast their worth. Modern research found no such link, of course. Handwriting style says almost nothing about a child's ability or character. But a generation was drilled, timed, and measured on it, and many carried the false belief that messy writing meant a messy person long into adult life. Number 2, discipline by exhaustion, the standing and the holding. Beyond the paddle and the ruler, teachers had a quieter arsenal. A misbehaving child might be made to stand in place for an hour or hold heavy books out at arm's length until the muscles burned and trembled, or kneel on a hard floor, sometimes on something that bit into the knees. The point was, physical discomfort sustained long enough to break the will and make an example. It left no marks a parent would notice, which was part of why it lasted. A child too proud to cry simply suffered in front of everyone. There was no thought to whether punishing a body taught a mind anything at all. Today, this would be documented and reported in an afternoon. Then it was just classroom management, a teacher's way of turning a young body against its own bad behavior. Number 1, the paddle on the wall. And finally, at number 1, the rule that defined the era and would end a teaching career on the spot today. Corporal punishment was not a last resort. It was the system. The paddle hung in plain view, often handmade, sometimes drilled with holes to swing faster and sting harder, and a child sent up for a swat bent over in front of the class or in the hallway and took it. Teachers and principals administered it freely for talking, for tardiness, for a wrong answer, for almost anything. And parents not only allowed it, they expected it. There was no review, no consent, no record. The threat of the paddle hung over every classroom, shaping behavior through fear of pain. It built the discipline the era was proud of, and it did it by hitting children. A parent today would not recognize the world that thought this was normal. But for the children of the 50s, the paddle on the wall was simply part of going to school. Across all 30 rules, one thing comes clear. The 1950s classroom ran on obedience, shame, and the certainty that adults always knew best, and it shaped a generation that endured a great deal without ever being asked how they felt about it. Some of these rules built grit. Many simply built fear. Which one shocked you the most? The paddle, the forced switch of a child's writing hand, the grades nailed to the wall for all to see. Tell me in the comments, and tell me if your parents or grandparents lived through any of these, because these were not just rules. They were the whole hidden machinery of how a generation was raised. They knew. Now you know too.